year is 108 BCE. Across the barren plains of Numidia marches a Roman army under the command of Quintus Cecilius Metellus. On the mountain pass above the approaching army, its enemies, commanded by the Numidian king Jugurtha, lie in wait. Metellus orders his army to head for the Mutul River to restock their dwindling water supply. It is at this moment that Jugurtha chooses to strike. Descending from all around them, the Numidian infantry surrounds the Roman army. Then, the famous Numidian cavalry slams into the Roman lines. Demoralized and unorganized, it seemed certain that Metellus' forces would fall to the Numidians. As fate would have it, a lone Roman officer by the name of Gaius Marius is able to rally a small contingent of soldiers to mount a counter-offensive against the Numidians. This small act of courage on Marius' part is able to turn the tide of the entire battle. With the Romans all around them, Jugurtha knew that his army would not be able to hold its own for much longer. He quickly ordered a retreat, and the Numidians withdrew from the conflict. The engagement was over, and the ambushed Roman army was victorious, thanks to the quick thinking of Gaius Marius. The heroics of Marius during the Battle of Mutul did not go unnoticed in the capital and around the Republic. Marius was made a consul of the Roman Republic and given command over all the Roman forces in Numidia. Eager to crush Jugurtha and his allies once and for all, Marius quickly returned to Rome to begin recruiting soldiers for his army. Up until this point in Rome's history, its military was made up of peasants and farmers who joined the army for around a season or two and then returned home back to their farms. There were certain requirements to be recruited as well. A recruited soldier must own land. They also must supply their own equipment. Armies were recruited to participate in a war, and once that specific war was over, the armies were disbanded. If another war were to start, the process of training and recruited soldiers would have to start again. The Roman army had lost a significant amount of soldiers during the Battle of Mutul, and battles before that, so when Marius began to recruit soldiers, there was simply no one left to recruit. All men eligible to become a Roman soldier were either dead or already in the Roman army. Marius knew that something would have to change. He needed to get more troops to conquer Jugurtha. Without more soldiers, he would surely fail. Searching for a solution, Marius devised a simple yet elegant change that effectively reorganized the entire Roman army and had far-reaching consequences not even Marius himself could see. Marius' solution? Something we now refer to as the Marian Reforms. They were a set of reforms aimed at making it easier for people to join the Roman army, and to make the army itself a more efficient and deadly force. The first of these reforms was to abolish the requirement that you had to own land before you could join the army. This simple removal of one rule opened up the army for all people of Rome. The common masses of Rome, who owned no property, saw the Roman army as a way to gain respect and glory. So naturally, the masses flocked to Marius' new army. However, these poor recruits could no longer afford to buy either weapons nor armor for themselves. So Marius made the Roman state provide it for them. This allowed for the standardization of weapons and, in turn, tactics in the Roman army. Capitalizing on the opportunity of the countless number of poor recruits, Marius decided to offer them pay in turn for enlisting with the army for 15 to 20 years. He also provided them with the reward of the spoils of war after they had conquered new people, as well as land grants once their term in the army was up. Most of these new recruits agreed, and with one swift stroke, Marius was able to turn the Roman army from an inexperienced seasonal force into a professional, experienced, standing army. With Rome's new army set, Marius needed to reform the actual structure of the Roman army to better suit its new circumstances. For years, the army had been divided into 5 distinct classes: cavalry, velites who acted as skirmishers, and Estati, Principales, and Triarii. The last three classes made up the core of the infantry of the Roman army, and were their main offensive weapon. Marius knew that his new army of peasants with a standardized set of weapons and armor could no longer operate under such an old system. He decided to abolish the old set of Velites, Estati, Principales, and Triarii, and consolidate them into one cohesive unit, the century. In each century was 80 men, all fighting together as one cohesive unit on the battlefield. 6 of these centuries would make a cohort of 480 men. 10 cohorts would make one legion, the premier Roman military force. This new organization of the army, coupled with new changes in equipment and training, created an entirely new Roman army that could contend with any enemy. After all the preparation, all the reforms, it was finally time to put Marius's new Roman army to the test. It was time for it to fulfill its true purpose, to crush Jugurtha and his Numidian army. Marius quickly set sail for Numidia, his new army in tow. Once they landed, their immediate task was to hunt down and destroy Jugurtha. The two armies, Numidian and Roman, engaged each other on multiple occasions, and in every battle, Marius's army easily gained the upper hand and destroyed the Numidians. Marius's reforms were working. His army was unstoppable. Finally, after many battles and some sly diplomacy, Jugurtha was captured and strangled to death in 104 BCE. Victory in Numidia was achieved, thanks to Marius and his new army. However, this was not to be the only effect of Marius's changes. His reforms would have irreversible changes for Rome itself, and eventually set the Roman Republic on the path to empire. With its new army, Rome began to snatch up land and expand the borders of its domain like never before. Marius's reforms had made the Roman army an almost invincible military force. However, this was but a side note to what the reforms really did. The most profound and influential consequence of the Marian reforms was the shift of the military's loyalty from Rome itself to the individual generals of the legions. Before the reforms, Roman armies were simply recruited for a war and then disbanded shortly afterwards. Because of the Marian reforms, the armies became professional, and soldiers stayed in those armies for 15 to 20 years. For those 15 to 20 years, they had contact with their general for that entire time. These soldiers relied on their general for everything, from supplies and food to weapons and land grants. If they had a good general, the soldiers were fiercely loyal to him and him alone. The new reforms marked the beginning of the end for the Roman Republic. With this shift of loyalty, it set precedents that included many generals crossing the Rubicon and taking control of Rome with their own soldiers. The legions of Rome became, in effect, the personal armies of their generals. This is how Julius Caesar would gain power and abolish the Republic. This is how Augustus would create the Roman Empire and forever change the course of Rome. And all of this was possible because of the reforms Marius made. As the history of Rome continued, emperor after emperor had to concern himself with the welfare of his legions, because an emperor without his legions was nothing. The true power of Rome lay in its legions, and the power of its legions was granted by the Marian Reforms.